To begin in the derech of our Rabbeim, sometimes the nuance of halacha has a lot in the spirit of Avodas Hashem. Shus Mayri Rabbi or of Kohn Shlita, or of Packer. Ramesha Feinstein in his Chuvas asks the following kasha. The Shagis Aryeh in Siman Chav Dalid writes that when it comes to Birchas HaTorah, if a person has a suffix of whether they need to say Birchas HaTorah again, there was some type of suffix, whether they were Yotzei Birchas HaTorah, whether they're Chayiv in Birchas HaTorah. So then in such a case, the halacha is that they are to repeat and say the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu. The bracha of Asher Kidsham Saisav Tzivanu Laslik B'divrei Seira is omitted. The bracha of Asher Bachar Banu is the Mu'ula Shebe Brachos, the Gemara describes. So the Shagis Aryeh says that when you have a suffix, so in such a case, you say the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu, but you don't say the bracha of Laslik B'divrei Seira. Ramesh is bothered, in the beginning of Chelek Beis, Ramesh is bothered that we have, at first glance, we have a similar case where the halacha is different. Now when it comes to Birchas HaMazon, which is the other bracha that's Doraisa, that if you have a suffix of whether you're chayiv in Birchas HaMazon, the halacha is that even though the first three brachas are Doraisa and the last is Dorabanan, the bracha of HaTov HaMeitiv is Dorabanan, but once a person is chayiv to bench, if he has a suffix Birchas HaMazon goes l'chumra, so then in such a case, then once he's benching, so then he's not only going to do the first three brachas, but will have to do the other. So asks Ramesha, why is it that when it comes to Birchas HaTorah, it's not this way? When it comes to Birchas HaTorah, we differentiate between the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu and the bracha of Lasoik B'divrei Seira. Ramesha suggests that Birchas HaTorah has two components to it. One is the bracha of Lasoik B'divrei Seira is a bracha on the most beautiful mitzvah that we have, one of the 613 mitzvahs. And that bracha is a Birchas HaMitzvah on Talmud Torah. On the other hand, the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu is not a Birchas HaMitzvah, but rather the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu is a Shevach V'Odat HaKadosh Baruch Hu Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'Nas Lanu. That bracha, Ramesha claims, is an entirely different track. When it comes to Birchas HaMazon, all the brachas of Birchas HaMazon are brachos of Shevach V'Odah, different types of Shevach V'Odah. Hazanes HaKol, Al Ha'aretz V'Al Hamazon, come join us in Eretz Yisrael. Al Ha'aretz V'Al Hamazon, Boinei Yerushalayim, Be'ezus Hashem, we should all see together. And then we have Al Yichasreinu, that's also a Hodat HaKadosh Baruch Hu Al Yichasreinu. So on that Al Yichasreinu, so then in such a case, once you're repeating, there's a Mechayiv of Hodah, you're going to repeat everything else. However, when it comes to Birchas HaTorah has Tzvei Bazundar Adinim, two entirely different things. One is a Birchas HaMitzvah like the greatest mitzvah of all, but it's quote-unquote just a Birchas HaMitzvah. The other is the Birchas Haidah of Asher Bachar Banu. What exactly is that Haidah? What is it about that of Haidah, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim Noisei Natayra, that makes it the formulation that is the Me'ula Sheba Brachos? And what does it tell us, B'siyata D'Shmaya, things that we should think about as what a beautiful thing, Chabura Oyevei Torah. It's beautiful. It didn't exist in my day. Something very, very, very special. So as Oyevei Torah, what does it tell us? That was unique, by the way, saying Gavaldik and Moiridik. That was something that is Gavaldik and Moiridik. Halavai in Eretz Yisrael, when you see Gavalt, we should see Talmidim of Rav Shechter Shlita, Rav Twersky Shlita, that they should be talking about Oyevei Torah. That's what should be in Eretz Yisrael when you see the words Gavalt. So first of all, Noisei Not Torah. Noisei Not Torah. The Gemara tells us in Brachas that when we learn Torah, it's as if we are re-experiencing Maimon Har Sinai. In other words, it's not just taking Ramesh's dialectic. It's not just that there's a Maisa Mitzvah of Talmud Torah that we should know HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. It's not a responsibility that every single one of us has to master the corpus of Torah, as Reb Chaim Volozhiner describes so beautifully in Shar Dalid. But rather, when we're learning Torah, we are being mekabel mipi agvura HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. And the Gemara has a mandate from that. And that mandate is that we're supposed to learn be'ema, be'reses, u'bezeya. It's supposed to be done as if we're receiving the Torah at that moment. Hence the bracha is not nasan Torah. It's not Nasan Torah, it's Naisein Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us the Torah Mechadash every day, Kiyu Chadashim. And that's something that I think in a yeshiva, where there's also a university component, where there are courses and requirements and so on and so forth, to recognize that our experience is not one that is just simply amassing information, whatever the derech halimud is, amassing information, but rather what we're doing is it's an encounter with Kudsha Brichu. And that mandates a certain approach, be'ema bereses ubezeya. Reb Branspiegel's at Salma, one of my great rabbeim who is here, the Rosh Kollel's friend from many, many years in Rav Soloveitchik's Zatzal Shir. Reb Branspiegel used to tell us that for himself, he can't even imagine how someone could sit and drink a Coca-Cola while they're learning. He, as a child Holocaust survivor, to him, cola was the lap of American luxury. To him, it was a stira. And he understood, though, that for the next generation, that's just the way we keep ourselves up. It's a caffeine boost. But to recognize that every generation is supposed to have its definition of what qualifies be'emo bereses ubezeya. I remember there were times over here that I would see guys, now for better and for worse, there's no television in the morgue lounge, but there would be guys who would be chazering for the bechinas and watching television at the same time with their feet up. Talmud Torah has to be done be'ema bereses ubezeya. A sense of Kabbalas HaTorah, mipi hagvura. They say that our Rebbe understood that was a different generation. They say one time in a Hasidic yeshiva, they have these very strong hakpadas about exactly how you're supposed to learn. So there was once a boy who was learning a ktsais with a kola. So the Rebbe came over to him and he said to him, "Azoy learnt min a ktsais mit a kola? That's how you learn a ktsais with a kola?" He said, "Nein, Rebbe, azoy drink min a kola mit a ktsais." No, Rebbe, we drink a kola with a ktsais. So for our generation, eina chanami, but there still is, it's supposed to be a sense, be'ema bereses ubezeya, that there's a certain focus that we're being mikabel Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Moshe Weinberger Shlita says that his father, when he came to America after the war, his father was stunned that he saw something in a Beis Medrash. When I learned in Torah, we didn't have chairs like this. Wow. And my generation, forget about Rav Moshe Weinberg, we didn't have chairs like this. In Torah there are benches. I don't know if it's that way. Still it is. It still is. So we had benches, wood benches. That's how. So Rav Moshe Weinberger's father came into a yeshiva or a shul, and there was wooden benches, and he told his son he was stunned that there were benches with a back. In Europe, he never saw that anybody lean back when they're learning Torah. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to experience Torah be'ema bereses ubezeya? A sense that it's not just that we're amassing information on a computer, but what we're doing is an encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Noisein HaTorah. Maybe there's something else. Asher Bachar Banu mikol ha'amim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us to be an Am HaNivchar, of course, as our great Rabbeim described, it comes with a tremendous responsibility. In other words, what Torah is supposed to do is, Torah is not only supposed to be learnt. Lasoik b'divrei Torah, asher kitshon saisav etzivanu. It's not just Noisein HaTorah, but rather it's supposed to create us as an Am HaNivchar, and it's supposed to transform us. And we have to ask ourselves, if this Mu'ula Shebebrachos, which demands us to be transformed into an Am HaNivchar, is that doing it to every single one of us personally? I heard an awesome story, maybe a little bit of background. This I'll wrap up because I want you to go learn. Say Rav Shamshin Pincus, Zechrona Livracha, found out that the Chafetz Chaim had a granddaughter that had emigrated to Israel. She had been stuck behind the Iron Curtain for a long time. And he heard a rumor that she was in a secular kibbutz. One of the reasons this is probably not in the Art Scroll books is because the Chafetz Chaim had a daughter that had been trapped behind the Iron a granddaughter. And the end of her life, she was on a secular kibbutz. Her identity had been maintained in secret. In other words, most people did not know that she was a Chafetz Chaim granddaughter. Rabbi Pincus was a firebrand, and he had a tremendous love for the Chafetz Chaim, and he did research, and he found out that The Chavetz Chaim's granddaughter was there. So he went to the kibbutz, and he questioned her, what's her last name, da-da-da-da. And he said to her, I believe you're the Chavetz Chaim's granddaughter, and I want to learn so much about things that you saw in your grandfather's house. First she denied it, and then she said, I'll answer one or two of your questions. I'll tell you one story with the condition you don't tell anybody else that I'm here, and you don't ask me any more questions. So this is the story that she told him, and she wanted to say a message to him, and that message was a very, very profound message, which I think is something that we should really, really ask ourselves. And the Chavetz Chaim wanted us to ask ourselves. She said when she was 16 or 17 years old, she decided that Radin was a small place. It was a very, very simple place. And she was a bright girl, and she wanted to go study in university. And she told her parents and her grandparents that she was planning to go to Russia, to St. Petersburg, and study over there. And his granddaughter describes, she's now in her 70s or 80s, I think she was a physicist in the USSR, and she said, you have to describe you have to understand what it was like going from Radin at the time to Russia, where the cities were really developed. Radin was a very, very backward city in terms of its technological advancement. And she said, we traveled along as I went to university, and the landscape began to change. First we went with horse and buggy, then to a train. The cities became more beautiful, they were lit up. And I studied in university. In those days, they actually studied in university. I studied in university, and I always loved my parents and grandparents, and I decided I wanted to go back to Radin to visit. And you can imagine the travel back. I'm going from this advanced cosmopolitan city with advanced education. This is before, of course, the communists destroyed everything. And she's traveling back through Russia into Lita. Eventually, the trains stop. You eventually go into a horse and buggy. There's no longer electricity. There isn't even toilets. There were outhouses. She says she comes into Radin, and it's late at night. And as the storybook scene, it's entirely dark in Radin. Her parents' house is dark, and she sees the Zayda's house, the great Saba Kadisha, the Chavetz Chaim. There's a candle still burning, and she goes in and she runs into her grandfather. She said, in a mixture of love and questioning, she said to her grandfather, I'll say it first in the Yiddish, the way the Chavetz Chaim's granddaughter said it to Rav Pincus. She said to him, Zayda, far was sitzt dir bei dem Licht? Why is it that you sit by the small candle? And she says, do you realize that there's a world out there? A world that they're studying that's so technologically advanced? And that entire world seems to be entirely closed off from you. The Chavetz Chaim did not say kanos back there, but he said something a lot sharper. He said, yes, ja mein Tochter, sie lernen dort in Asach. The legend in the yeshivas is that at that time the Chavetz Chaim said, and a few years from now, they're going to send a man to the moon. But here's the critical line. Aber dorten, over there, sie lernen wie azoi der Welt geht. There they learn how the world works. Aber da in Radin, bei dem Licht, here in Radin, by this candle, bei dem Sefer, by this old Svarim, we learn, wie azoi zu sein a Tzelem Elokim, wie azoi zu sein a Mensch. Very, very powerful message he was saying. There's a lot of information out there. Aber da, by dem Licht, by that candle of Torah, we are becoming a Tzelem Elokim. Chavetz Chaim was saying to his granddaughter, to Rav Shamshon Pincus, to us, it's not only the mitzvah of Lasik b'divrei Sarah, the Maisa mitzvah. It's not only the sense of Be'emo Beresis u'Bezeya, but our Amelis B'Torah, the goal is to make ourselves true Tzelem Elokim. And I want you to think about that. What does that mean? What does that mean that when you're learning second seder, more dapim in ksubis? What does that mean when you're learning second seder, yichyuvim in halacha? How is it that we're making ourselves at Tzelem Elokim? Because the Chavetz Chaim said that that is what's unique and what's taking place when you learn his Mishnah Berurah. Maybe zocha b'siyata d'shmaya to be mekayim lasik b'divrei seira. That noisein Torah, that we should feel that we're learning HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah be'emo b'reses u'b'zeya unda. And over here, Machim mentioned Memachin at Tzelem Elokim. May we be zocha that every single one of us to feel that Torah is making us at Tzelem Elokim. Learn Bas Mada.